Why did she feel their eyes on her before she even stepped into the hall? Kara paused just outside the steel-framed doors of Training Hall C, listening to the low thunder of 282 Navy SEALs moving, shifting, breathing. Men who had survived selections that broke bones, tore lungs, and crushed egos. But it wasn't their strength that weighed on her chest. It was the quiet assumption carried in those guarded glances she'd already endured all morning. The assumption that she didn't belong. Her hand hovered over the door handle, pulse steady but heavy. Funny. She had breached compounds in Kandahar with less hesitation than this moment. Maybe because in Kandahar she knew the enemy. Here she faced something far more complicated: judgment from allies. The briefing room earlier still echoed in her thoughts. Master Sergeants Dawson and Reynolds, their clipped voices, the smirks they didn't bother hiding, the way the junior instructors looked down at their boots. She had held her composure. She always did. But composure didn't mean she hadn't felt the heat rise in her throat when Reynolds suggested she had theoretical experience. It didn't mean she hadn't felt the weight of the old scar across her shoulder. Her body's reminder that she had bled for her country in ways they'd never understand. Colonel Tangestal's words returned to her. They don't need strength. They need adaptability. They need someone who survived the kind of chaos the manuals don't cover. And that someone was her. She pushed the door open. The hall went silent. Rows upon rows of SEALs stood in formation beneath the skylights, broad shoulders, iron posture, eyes sharp as cold steel. The air carried the faint scent of rubber mats, gun oil, and the Pacific drifting in from the open ventilation bays. They didn't move, but she felt the ripple go through them. A woman, a lieutenant, their instructor. She walked with deliberate calm, the kind that came from years of learning not to show fear, not even show uncertainty. But something tightened inside her when she saw Dawson and Reynolds flanking the mat, hands clasped behind their backs, faces wearing identical masks of polite disdain. She stopped in the center of the mat. "At ease," she said. They shifted, barely but enough. She took a breath, one quiet enough only she heard it. "Teach them, not prove yourself, teach them." Then she began speaking, measured and steady. "Today we cover adaptive response in compromised situations. Situations where size and strength stop mattering. Situations where—" "With respect, Lieutenant," Dawson interrupted, stepping forward with the smooth confidence of a man used to dominance. "Maybe we should show them something practical first." The emphasis on lieutenant cut sharper than it should have. A few SEALs exchanged looks, small, almost imperceptible smirks. Kara saw every one. Reynolds added, "Hands-on instruction is always more memorable, especially when it comes from someone with real-world combat experience." Scattered low laughter. "Not much, but enough." Kara didn't blink. "Excellent suggestion," she replied, stepping onto the center mat. She knew exactly what they were doing. It didn't matter. Sometimes the only way to dismantle arrogance was to let it swing first. The SEALs leaned forward slightly. They felt something brewing. Kara continued, "Master Sergeants Dawson and Reynolds will assist me." They stepped in, one on either side of her, two large silhouettes boxing her in. Dawson rolled his shoulders. Reynolds cracked his knuckles. And across the hall, Colonel Tangestal crossed her arms and said nothing. Kara spoke to the class. "In the field, you won't always face opponents who fight fair." The attack struck mid-sentence. A coordinated hit. Reynolds swept her legs. Dawson drove into her upper body. Her balance cut out. Air punched from her lungs. The mat slammed into her spine with a crack that echoed. Gasps. A few muffled laughs. One whispered, "Damn." Dawson planted his boot near her shoulder, not touching her, but close enough to show he could. "First lesson," Reynolds announced to the SEALs, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Recognize when you're outmatched." A beat passed. Another. Humiliation hovered thick as smoke. Kara stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights above blurred slightly, not from pain but from something deeper, an anger she'd buried long ago, an anger she didn't let speak aloud. She felt the old memories stir. The alley in Kandahar, the cold dirt, the sound of her own breath when she thought she wouldn't get up again. Not today. She exhaled once, slow, controlled. Then her voice sliced through the air. Second lesson, she said calmly, never assume victory until your opponent is neutralized. Her movement snapped like a trap. She caught Dawson's boot with one hand, twisting sharply, yanking him off balance. Her legs shot upward, coiling and scissoring, momentum snapping through her core. Dawson toppled backward, hitting the mat with a grunt. Reynolds lunged, reaching for her wrist. She rolled sideways, fast, fluid, springing to her feet with a motion so seamless it made several SEALs lean back involuntarily. Reynolds drew a training knife, plastic but shaped with intent. Show them what real combat looks like, he snarled. Dawson was already coming at her again. 2 against 1. Both heavier. Both faster. Both angry. Something inside Kara cooled. A stillness. A clarity. The exact clarity she had felt in 2019 when she was alone, wounded, and surrounded by 6 combatants with real knives and real intent to kill. Reynolds slashed. She stepped in, not away, redirecting his wrist, driving her elbow into his sternum. His air exploded out. He folded. Dawson came in with a powerful hook. She turned into it, absorbing the angle, letting his force slip past her instead of through her. But his sheer weight caught her shoulder. Pain shot white-hot. She staggered. A thin line of blood slid from her lip. Silence crushed the hall. Even the smirkers stopped breathing. Reynolds recovered, knife rising again. Dawson circled. Kara wiped the blood with her thumb, eyes sharpening into something colder than anger. Something the SEALs instantly recognized, because they'd seen it in war movies, in documentaries, in the eyes of warriors who had survived things no one should. Resolve without noise. Fear without panic. Determination without ego. She removed her uniform jacket, tossing it aside. The scars across her arms and shoulders caught the sunlight, thin, jagged, brutally honest. Scars from places where evacuation didn't come. Scars earned, not given. You wanted a demonstration, she said quietly. Let's make it educational. Reynolds attacked first. The next 20 seconds became a blur. The SEALs would recount differently for years. Kara moved like water around stone, redirecting, striking, pivoting. Not overpowering, not out-muscling, out-thinking, out-timing, out-adapting. She trapped Reynolds' wrist. The knife clattered away. Dawson charged. She stepped inside, leveraged his weight and sent him sprawling. Before he rose, she pinned his uniform to the mat with the fallen knife, blunted tip jammed into the foam beneath. Reynolds lifted his head, only to freeze when her boot touched lightly against his throat. Not pressing, just showing she could. Stand down, she said. Nobody breathed. Then Colonel Tangestal's voice rang out, sharp as a gavel. And that, gentlemen, is why Lieutenant Mitchell is teaching this course. For the first time, 282 Navy SEALs looked at Kara not with doubt, but with something close to awe. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the scars, beneath the discipline, beneath the years of silence, she felt the faintest, quietest ember of pride warm her chest. Not because she proved them wrong, but because she taught them something they desperately needed to learn. What made Dawson pause afterward? Kara noticed it, the quick, almost imperceptible hesitation as he rose from the mat. His hand brushed the torn fabric where the training knife had pinned him, and for a second he looked less like a man embarrassed, and more like a man confronted by something he didn't understand. It wasn't her speed. It wasn't her technique. It was the realization that he had underestimated the one thing he'd spent his whole career telling rookies never to overlook: intent. Reynolds climbed to his feet slower, breath ragged, the earlier mockery gone. Not replaced by respect, not yet, but by something quieter, something rower. Confusion, maybe even fear, not fear of her. Fear of what he had revealed about himself in front of the SEALs. Kara stepped back, giving the men space. The hall remained silent, 282 operators standing so still that she could hear the building hum. One of the skylights above let in a beam of sunlight that landed directly on the mat, illuminating the faint smear of blood along her lip. She wiped it again, slower this time, replaying the moment she hit the ground. It wasn't the fall that bothered her. Falls never bothered her. It was the laughter. And the memory it woke up. She pushed that thought down, not now. Colonel Tangistal approached the center of the mat, her boots striking with the steady rhythm of someone used to commanding not just rooms but entire operations. Her expression remained unreadable, but Kara caught something in her eyes, a small spark of confirmation. As if the colonel wasn't impressed, just reassured. She had known what would happen today. She had counted on it. The colonel addressed the SEALs. Lieutenant Mitchell has faced conditions most of you will never encounter. What you saw today wasn't a performance. It was survival adapted into technique. She turned slightly, just enough for Kara to feel the weight of her gaze. And survival, the colonel continued, is what keeps you alive when strength and training fail. No one shifted, no one blinked. And yet amid that stillness, Kara sensed something shift inside her, not in her body but in the room, an energy realigning itself. For the first time since she stepped foot into Coronado, she wasn't defending her presence. She was defining it. She began the formal instruction, not loud, not dramatic, but calm and firm. When you're overwhelmed, she explained, your brain wants to freeze, fight too early, or flee too late. None of those work. Adaptive response is about delaying your instinct long enough to choose the right reaction instead of the emotional one. Her voice echoed slightly off the steel rafters. Why does that matter? She asked, packing slowly. Because fear is predictable, anger is predictable, pride is predictable, but adaptation confuses your opponent. She let that settle a moment. Predictable fighters die first. The SEALs absorbed her words with the seriousness of men who had lost teammates. A few faces hardened as if remembering someone specific. Kara noticed. Loss was a language all warriors understood without translation. She studied the class a moment longer, gauging posture, engagement, ego, resistance. She needed to build trust, not just authority. But something was off. Not with the class, with her. Her heart felt heavier than it should have. Her thoughts kept flickering back to that split second on the mat when she had seen the boot beside her shoulder and heard a muffled laugh behind her. It had lasted only a heartbeat, but inside that heartbeat, memories she kept buried rose up like ghosts gripping her spine. The dark room. The broken radio antenna in her hand. 6 silhouettes closing in. Her voice whispering, not yet, not yet, not yet. The certainty she wouldn't see the sunrise. The fear she had swallowed so deep she'd forgot how much space it still occupied. She blinked hard, grounding herself. Not here. She guided the SEALs into partner drills, controlled, structured, safe. Yet even in watching them, she sensed murmurs in the ranks. Not insults, not doubts, questions, curiosity. A shift from dismissal to evaluation, as if they were mentally rewriting everything they had assumed about her. It should have comforted her. Instead, it made her uneasy. She wasn't here to be impressive. She wasn't here to be a spectacle. The colonel's words echoed again, someone who's lived it. The implication carried weight. Her experience wasn't a badge, it was a burden. And the burden had teeth. As the drills intensified, she walked between the rows, correcting posture, adjusting stance, offering brief nods when someone executed a move correctly. She kept her tone neutral, resisting the urge to speak too softly or too sharply. Respect wasn't granted in this place. It was calibrated. She paused beside a young SEAL practicing a wrist leverage technique. "Rotate your hips, not your shoulders," she said. "Shoulder power is limited. Hip power is." He nodded but didn't look at her. Embarrassment, concentration, maybe both. She let him focus and moved on. 20 minutes passed, then 40. Sweat beaded across brows and dripped onto mats. The rhythm of controlled grunts and shifting weight filled the hall like a heartbeat. Kara almost let herself relax into the flow. Almost. Because somewhere near the back, two SEALs were talking in low murmurs. Not disrespectfully, but with that specific tone men used when grappling with the idea that their worldview had a crack in it. She stopped near them without announcing it. Both men straightened fast. "Problem?" she asked. "No, ma'am," one answered, but something in his eyes flickered, a question he was afraid to ask. Kara waited. He hesitated, then exhaled. "Ma'am, earlier when you were pinned, you didn't look surprised." She stiffened. "And when you got up," he continued slowly, "you didn't look angry, like you were expecting it." Her jaw tightened. The second SEAL added quietly, "Like you've been there before." Kara held their gaze, not with hostility, not with dismissal. Just with truth she couldn't say out loud. Then she said the only thing that wouldn't open a door she couldn't close. "Experience teaches you what ego never will." They nodded, not fully understanding, but respecting the boundaries she had drawn. She walked on. As the session neared its end, Kara demonstrated a final sequence, a combination of leverage, timing, and misdirection. Her movements were steady, measured, nothing flashy, nothing that invited comparisons. But she felt eyes tracking not just her technique, but her breathing, her posture, her pauses. They were studying her. Not judging. Learning. For some reason, that scared her more. When Colonel Tangistal dismissed the class, the SEALs filed out with quiet energy, talking in hushed tones, replaying the fight, the lessons, the shock. A few glanced at her with something like respect. Others avoided her eyes, still processing what it meant to be wrong. Only when the hall emptied did Kara feel her shoulders finally loosen. For a moment she stood alone on the mat, staring at the faint indentation where the knife had pinned Dawson's uniform. The smell of rubber and sweat lingered in the air. A gull screeched outside. The distant crash of waves filtered in. Her lip throbbed. Her shoulder ached. Her mind replayed the laughter. She whispered to herself, "Why does it still get to me?" She didn't have an answer. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Something she'd buried so deep that even she didn't know how to face it. And whether she liked it or not, this place was beginning to unearth it. Why did her hands tremble only when no one was watching? Kara stared at them now, resting on the edge of her bunk hours after the session ended, fingers faintly shaking despite her steady breathing. She flexed them once, twice, as if testing whether they still belonged to her. They did, but the tremor wasn't physical and she knew it. It was memory. Kandahar never truly left the body. Outside, Coronado's night air carried the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. The base wasn't quiet, bases never were, but the murmurs of disciplined routine felt different after the day she'd had. Word was already spreading. She heard it from passing units at the mess hall, from nods that lingered a second too long, from officers who suddenly knew her name. She didn't like it. Attention was a currency she learned long ago to avoid. Praise even more so. Praise became expectation. Expectation became pressure. Pressure became mistakes. And mistakes cost blood. She forced a slow breath, grounding herself, but her chest still felt tight. Earlier, when she'd walked back from the hall, adrenaline had crashed hard, leaving her with that familiar mix of exhaustion and unease. Not embarrassment. She was long past being embarrassed by men who underestimated her. It was something else. Something old. She reached unconsciously for the scar at her collarbone, the one shaped like a question mark carved by a foreign blade. She traced it gently, then looked away from it as if the memory beneath the surface might see her staring. A knock at the door. She froze. Another knock firmer. She rose, straightened her uniform jacket, and opened it. Master Sergeant Dawson stood there, posture stiff, eyes surprisingly calm. Not hostile, not defensive, something almost resembling humility. "Lieutenant," he said. "Master Sergeant." He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "I owe you something." "You already apologized on the mat," she replied. "That was for the class," he said. "This is for me." Kara said nothing. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't step aside. She simply let the moment stretch until Dawson exhaled. "I underestimated you," he said simply. "Not because you're small, not because you're a woman, because," he shook his head, "because I thought I had you figured out." "No one is that simple," she said. "Apparently not." Another pause. He looked down at her boots, then back up, almost studying her for the first time as a soldier rather than a symbol of resentment. "Reynolds wants to talk to you too, eventually. He's processing." Kara didn't smile, but something softened around her eyes. "He'll come around." "Not if you break his wrist again," Dawson joked, and to her surprise, she felt a small corner of tension lift inside her chest. Then Dawson added, "Where'd you learn that disarm, the one you used on him? I've seen a lot, but that wasn't standard Krav." She hesitated, then offered only the surface truth: Afghanistan. Still, something deeper lingered unspoken, something she wasn't ready to unwrap. "Good night, Lieutenant," Dawson said, nodding once before leaving. She closed the door gently behind him, then leaned against it, allowing herself a slow exhale. Progress. That should have felt good. Instead, it felt like someone had turned a key she didn't realize was in a lock inside her. She sat at her desk and began writing training notes, but her focus drifted. Words blurred on the page. Her thoughts kept circling back to the young SEAL who had asked earlier, "You didn't look surprised like you've been there before." The observation had pierced deeper than he knew. Because he was right. She had been there before. Pinned, mocked, underestimated, and bleeding into dust while men closed in with blades. She shook her head, focus. Tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow always was. She woke before dawn, long before her alarm buzzed. The Pacific air seeped through the barracks window, cold and briny. She dressed quietly, tying her hair back with mechanical precision, each motion grounding her in routine that steadied her pulse. Outside, the sky glowed faint pink over Coronado. The SEALs were already assembling for morning conditioning, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. She passed them with a composed nod. A few nodded back. A few watched her. Most pretended not to. She didn't need their approval, but the shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable. Word traveled fast in special operations, faster than radio signals sometimes. And the story of a 54 lieutenant disarming 2 senior instructors was evolving. She overheard snippets. She saw the strike before it happened. Reynolds said it was like fighting smoke. Dawson swears she moved before he did. What unit was she with again? Rumor filled the gaps between facts like water finding cracks in stone. Colonel Tangastal approached her during breakfast, carrying her tray with the ease of someone who had never once been intimidated by rank or reputation. "You made an impression," the colonel remarked, sitting across from her. "It wasn't my intention," Kara said. "It rarely is," Tangastal replied. "The best lessons aren't planned, they're demonstrated." Kara stirred her coffee. "They'll expect more now." "They'll get more," the colonel said. "You're not here because you're impressive, Lieutenant. You're here because you survived. There's a difference." Kara's throat tightened. She didn't respond. Tangastal continued. What you teach them in the next 3 weeks could save lives or cost them. And that's not about gender or size, it's about truth. Kara met her gaze. What truth? That no matter how prepared they think they are, the world is capable of breaking them. A long beat passed. Then the colonel added, softer, and you know what it's like to break. Kara looked away because yes, she did. Too well. Training Hall C waited. The SEALs gathered again, some with visible anticipation, others guarded. Reynolds stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw clenched, refusing to meet her eyes. Not from anger. From humiliation he hadn't yet reprocessed into humility. Good. Humility was teachable. Pride wasn't. Kara stepped to the front. Today, she began, we learn the part of adaptive combat that most operators fail, psychological displacement. They blinked, unfamiliar with the term. Meaning? One SEAL asked. Meaning, she said, I'm going to show you how to make your enemy doubt what they're seeing. Before they could react, she moved quick enough to make several men flinch. She didn't strike. She didn't attack. She simply shifted her stance in a way that made her appear taller than she was, more grounded, more unreadable. Your body tells a story, she said, and in combat the story you choose to tell can save your life. Reynolds scowled. With respect, ma'am, the enemy doesn't care about stories. Kara stepped toward him, close enough for him to feel the presence radiating off her. When you were 10 seconds from passing out yesterday, she said quietly, you cared. He froze. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't sharpen, it simply carried weight. Strength intimidates, she continued. Confidence confuses, but unpredictability, she paused, unpredictability terrifies. She stepped back. Pair up. The room obeyed almost instantly. Kara walked among them again, watching movements tighten, eyes narrow, mind shift. And for a moment, she let herself believe that this was just another day of teaching. But then a flash of movement from a shadowed corner caught her eye. A SEAL sitting alone, not participating, his face troubled, uncertain, almost scared. Of what? Or of whom? Kara approached him slowly. You're not training, she said. He swallowed hard. Ma'am, I saw something yesterday. What did you see? She asked quietly. He hesitated. Then whispered, you weren't fighting them, not really. Her pulse skipped. You were fighting something else. And for the first time since she arrived at Coronado, Kara felt exposed. Not physically. Not professionally. Emotionally. Deeply. Uncomfortably. Because he was right. And she didn't know how to hide it anymore. Why did his words hit her harder than any strike she'd taken in combat? Kara stood there, heartbeat slowing, eyes fixed on the young SEAL who wouldn't even look up at her. He sat with his elbows on his knees, head bowed, the edges of something raw trembling beneath his voice. Not disrespect, not fear, recognition. You weren't fighting them, he repeated quietly. You were somewhere else. The world around her hushed, the murmurs of training pairs, the thud of bodies hitting mats, the cadence of timed drills, all of it seemed to recede into a distant hum. Kara felt the floor beneath her feet like a memory, uneven, uncertain, shifting into a different time, a different place. She inhaled through her nose, steady but sharp. What makes you say that? She asked, though she already knew. He ran a hand over his buzzed hair. Because I've seen that look before. He finally glanced at her, eyes dark with unspoken experience. On my brother, before he took his own life after deployment. The air left her lungs like a punch. He looked away again, jaw tightening. When you were on the ground yesterday, just for a second, you looked like someone who'd been there before, somewhere you didn't want to be. Kara didn't respond, couldn't respond. She only let the silence hold between them, heavy and honest. I'm sorry, ma'am, he murmured, standing quickly as if he'd crossed a line. It wasn't my place. No, she said quietly, stopping him with a raised hand. You saw something real. Most people don't. He froze, waiting. Kara swallowed, feeling the metallic taste of memory rise in her throat. What you saw wasn't for them. It wasn't part of the lesson. She looked past him at the others training. Some ghosts don't announce themselves. They follow. He nodded, eyes softening. Then he said something she wasn't prepared for. Whatever you're carrying, it made you stronger, not weaker. She felt her chest tighten, not in pain, but in something dangerously close to vulnerability. Get back to training, she said gently. Yes, ma'am. He jogged back into the formation, leaving Kara standing alone amidst the movement, her thoughts suddenly sharp enough to cut. She forced herself to rejoin the instruction, walking the rows, correcting grips, demonstrating leverage. Outwardly, she was the same controlled, unshaken instructor they admired. But inside, something unsettled had cracked open. She moved through the motions automatically, muscle memory guiding her. But her mind drifted unwillingly, unavoidably, to Kandahar. The alley. The dust. The pressure of a boot on her ribs. The taunting laughter in a language she didn't speak but understood perfectly. Her breath hitched. Not here. Not now. She grounded her fingers against the mat, pressing until the sting steadied her breathing. She finished the session without another slip. But the look on that young seal's face haunted her long after she dismissed them. Night hit Coronado like a slow exhale, purple sky fading to dark, waves growing louder against the pier. Kara walked along the dim path behind the barracks, letting the ocean air clear the fog inside her chest. She should have been reviewing tomorrow's lesson plan, or sleeping, or at least pretending she wasn't unraveling. Instead, she walked, steady, deliberate steps in boots that felt suddenly too heavy. Lieutenant. The voice came from behind her, quiet but firm. Kara turned. Reynolds. Of all people, he was the last one she expected to seek her out voluntarily. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, posture rigid with conflicting emotions, pride fighting humility, frustration fighting respect. She waited. He cleared his throat. You, humiliated me yesterday. Kara raised a brow. That wasn't my intention. I know. He moved closer, stopping beside the railing overlooking the dark ocean. And that's the worst part. You weren't even trying. She had no answer to that. Reynolds stared out at the waves, his voice quieter now. I've trained with the best. I've fought some serious men in the field, but yesterday, you didn't beat me with force or strength. He shook his head, still baffled. You beat me with something else. She didn't speak. She let him find the words. You fought like someone who's been on the edge, he finally said. Like someone who's survived something she shouldn't have. Her stomach dropped, that painful, familiar freefall she'd felt the moment before her radio antenna snapped in Kandahar. Reynolds continued, Dawson and I, we didn't just underestimate you. We triggered something we didn't understand. Kara leaned against the railing, eyes closing briefly. It wasn't your fault, she said. I should have controlled my response better. Bullshit, Reynolds muttered. Her eyes snapped open. That wasn't loss of control, he said. That was instinct. That was experience. That was someone who's fought with her life on the line and walked out alone. A long silence settled between them. Then Reynolds asked the question she'd avoided for 2 years. What happened to you over there? Kara's breath caught. She stared at the ocean, dark, restless, unyielding, the same way her memories felt. I was separated from my unit, she said slowly. Radio failure, wrong alley, wrong time. Reynolds waited. There were 6 of them. He inhaled sharply, understanding the severity without needing details. I thought I was dead. Her voice remained even, but inside she felt the familiar tremor rise beneath her ribs. All I had was a broken radio antenna, and the will not to die that day. Reynolds didn't speak, not out of discomfort, out of respect. It wasn't the fight, she said. It was the part after, the silence, the way the world feels when you realize no one's coming. The ocean roared below them, as if echoing her confession. Reynolds finally stepped closer, his voice steady. You shouldn't have had to face that alone. Kara let the truth hang in the air without responding. He exhaled, looking almost ashamed. Yesterday, I wasn't trying to teach you anything. I was trying to put you in your place, and you taught me more in 20 seconds than I learned in 20 years. She turned, genuinely surprised by the sincerity in his face. Reynolds swallowed. We need you here. These men need what you know. He paused. And I need to learn what I missed. Kara felt something shift inside her, not healing, not forgiveness, but possibility. Then show up tomorrow, she said. Reynolds nodded once. I will. He stepped away, leaving her alone with the ocean and the ghost of Kandahar whispering in her chest. Kara closed her eyes. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, she allowed herself to feel tired. Not the physical kind. The kind that came from carrying a story she'd never spoken out loud. A story she feared might break her again. Because she felt something coming, a lesson, a moment, a confrontation that would force her to finally face the past she kept outrunning. And this time, she wouldn't be able to hide it. Why did the sky feel heavier that morning, as if the sunlight itself hesitated before touching the base? Kara sensed it the moment she stepped out of the barracks. The air was unusually still. No gulls, no distant cadence calls. Even the ocean sounded muted, as if the world were waiting for something it couldn't name. She walked toward Training Hall C with steady footsteps, but inside, something unsettled pulsed beneath the surface. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anxiety. It was anticipation, the dangerous kind, the kind soldiers felt before something breaks open. Reynolds was already there. He stood alone in the middle of the mat, stretching his shoulders, eyes sharp but calm, none of the ego from earlier days. When he saw her, he nodded respectfully. Not forced, not grudging, genuine. Kara returned it. You're early. Didn't sleep, he said. Figured I might as well get here before the class. She could tell he wanted to say more, an apology, a confession, a question, but before he could, seals began filing in, boots echoing. Dawson joined Reynolds, giving Kara a curt nod that carried something unreadable. Maybe gratitude, maybe regret, maybe both. The atmosphere inside the hall was different. Still serious. Still disciplined. But no longer skeptical. They were ready for something, though none of them knew what. Kara stepped forward. Today, we test your adaptability under pressure. A few faces tightened with anticipation. She continued, strength matters, skill matters, but there's something more powerful than both. Reynolds spoke without thinking, presence. Kara gave him a surprised glance, then nodded. Exactly. She scanned the room. When you walk into a fight, you decide what story the enemy sees. Fear is a story. Confidence is a story. But unpredictability, that's the one they can't protect against. A ripple of understanding passed through the ranks. She began demonstrating fluid transitions, how to shift from defense to offense without a pause, how to use silence, stillness, even vulnerability. Then she did something unexpected. She stopped. In the middle of the mat, she stood completely still. The hall fell silent. Right now, she said softly, I want you to look at me and tell me what you see. They blinked. A few exchanged confused glances. One SEAL raised his hand. Ma'am, we see a trained fighter, someone experienced. Someone fast, another said. Someone dangerous, added a third. Kara absorbed their answers, then asked, and what else? Silence. She stepped closer to them. Do you see someone who is afraid? They hesitated, uncertain whether it was a trick question. Do you see someone who is tired? No response. Do you see someone who carries ghosts on her back every day? A few SEALs shifted uncomfortably. Because they did. But they didn't know how to say it. Kara exhaled slowly. Your enemy sees what you allow them to see, and the parts of yourself you won't face, her voice thinned, will betray you at the worst possible moment. Reynolds swallowed hard. The young SEAL from yesterday, the one who saw too much, watched her carefully. Kara saw concern in his eyes. That same concern tugged at something she didn't want touched. Pair off, she instructed. Today is about emotional exposure under pressure. The SEALs obeyed, but not with the usual bravado. Their movements carried caution, curiosity, a growing awareness that this lesson wasn't just physical. Reynolds approached her mid-session, face thoughtful. Lieutenant, what you said earlier, that wasn't about us, was it? Kara didn't answer. Instead, she demonstrated a movement on him, soft, precise, redirecting his weight without force. You're thinking too loud, she said quietly. Clear your mind. He tried again, focusing more deeply, and something shifted in his movement, less aggression, more control. Good, she said. He held her gaze. You teach like someone who had no choice but to learn. Kara stiffened. Focus on your form, Master Sergeant. But the words had lodged inside her, sharp as shrapnel. She turned away before he could read her expression. As she moved through the rows, correcting drills, her mind kept drifting to the edge of that memory she tried so hard to suppress. The one that surfaced every time someone mentioned being alone, or fear, or survival that felt like failure. She saw flashes. The corner where one of the men had blocked her escape. The broken radio antenna in her bleeding hand. The realization that she had minutes, maybe seconds before the end. Her throat tightened, she swallowed hard. Lieutenant. She turned. The same young SEAL again, eyes searching hers with uncomfortable clarity. You okay, ma'am? He asked softly. She almost said yes, the automatic lie. But something in his voice, in the genuine concern, made her chest ache unexpectedly. She steadied her breath. I'm fine, focus on your drills. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. She walked away quickly. But the moment lingered, clinging to her ribs. The second half of the session was harder. Not physically, mentally. It wasn't the drills, or the questions, or even the respect she felt growing around her. It was the quiet. The way silence inside her mind was starting to fill with things she'd buried. By the time Colonel Tangistal arrived to observe, Kara felt the weight pressing against her sternum like a hand. The colonel watched closely, too closely, as if she could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. At the session's end, Tangistal signaled for her to stay behind. The SEALs filtered out, sweaty, bruised, adrenaline still buzzing. Reynolds lingered near the back, giving Kara a small nod before leaving. Dawson followed. Then it was only Kara and the colonel. Tangistal stepped forward. You're slipping. Kara stiffened. Ma'am. Your control, the colonel said softly. Your emotional center, it's off. Kara bristled. With respect, I've executed every lesson effectively. You have, Tangistal said, but this work demands more than effectiveness. These men mirror their instructor. If you waver, they will feel it. Kara looked away. Tangistal's voice softened. You can't teach them to face their ghosts while you're running from yours. Those words hit with precision, far more precise than any strike Dawson or Reynolds could have delivered. Kara's breath trembled. Ma'am, I've handled it. No, Tangistal said gently. You've survived it, not handled it. Kara closed her eyes. For a moment, the world seemed to sway. Tangistal stepped closer. When you fought those men yesterday, that wasn't anger. That was memory, and memory is dangerous when mixed with training. Kara swallowed hard, refusing to break. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth, the colonel said quietly. To yourself if no one else. Kara shook her head. It won't help. It might, Tangistal said, or it might hurt, but either way it's time. Kara's voice dropped. Why now? Because, the colonel said, meeting her eyes, you're teaching men who will face their own ghosts soon. And if you don't confront yours, one day, in the middle of a mission, it will grab you by the throat and pull you back into the alley you never left. Kara flinched, because she had never told the colonel about the alley. Yet Tangistal knew. Of course she knew. The colonel placed a hand on her shoulder, firm, steady, grounding. You don't have to be invincible here. You just have to be honest. Kara looked at the colonel's hand, then at the floor, then finally at the empty hall around her. The silence felt like a test. The air felt heavier. And for the first time since arriving, she felt something inside her loosen, the faintest crack in the shield she wore like armor. Not breaking. Opening. Maybe for the first time. That night, lying awake on her bunk, sleep refusing to come, she stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark. I wasn't supposed to survive. And as the words left her mouth, she felt the truth settle, sharp, painful but freeing. She wasn't done running. Not yet. But the ground behind her was finally catching up. Who was she if the past could still pull her backward with a single memory? Kara lay awake for hours, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of her own breathing. Every inhale felt too shallow, every exhale too slow. Sleep refused to come, and she wasn't surprised. The colonel's words had unsettled something she'd held together with discipline and denial. She turned on her side, staring at the faint moonlight cutting across the barracks floor, thin as a blade. Her chest tightened, not with pain but with recognition. She was slipping. Not because of weakness, but because after years of burying the truth, she was finally standing still long enough for it to catch her. The morning bell rang long before she wanted to hear it. She dressed mechanically, boots laced, hair tied, jacket smoothed, but when she looked at her reflection in the dim mirror, eyes shadowed, jaw clenched, she didn't see the unshakable instructor the SEALs had begun to trust. She saw the girl in the alley again. Small, bleeding, alone. She blinked, forcing the image away. Not today. Outside, Coronado greeted her with sharp sunlight and cold wind. The contrast hit her chest like a jolt. The SEALs were already forming outside Training Hall C, stretching, hydrating, shaking out stiffness. She scanned them quickly, noting posture, morale, tension. Assessing readiness helped ground her. Until she noticed the young SEAL again. The one who saw too much. He stood apart from the group, waiting, not for instruction, not for orders. For her. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. She did. Inside the hall, the air felt charged, expectant. Reynolds and Dawson stood together, murmuring quietly. When Kara approached, both men straightened. Not stiff, not defensive. Respectful. We're ready, Lieutenant, Dawson said. Something flickered in her chest, pride maybe, or maybe fear of failing them. She nodded once. Let's begin. The session started smoothly, too smoothly. The SEALs moved with precision, absorbing every nuance of her instruction. But Kara felt disconnected from her own voice, as if she were watching herself from a distance. Her movements were flawless, her tone steady, her authority intact. And yet she felt hollow. Lieutenant. Reynolds' voice cut through the fog. Kara blinked. What? You said prepare for Phase 2, Reynolds said gently. But we already started Phase 2. The SEAL stared, not judgmental, concerned. Kara's stomach dropped. Her mind had drifted, and she hadn't even realized. She forced a breath, grounding her heels into the mat. Continue drills, she ordered. As they dispersed, Tangistal stepped into the hall, silent, observant, eyes sharper than anyone else. She approached without a word. Kara braced. The colonel leaned close. "You're at the edge." "I'm fine," Kara whispered. "No," Tangistal replied. "You're standing in two places at once, here and the alley." Kara's throat went dry. She stepped back, anger rising, not at the colonel but at herself, at the weakness she didn't want to name. "I said I'm fine." Tangistal didn't raise her voice. "And I said you're not." The hall went quiet enough that Kara could feel the tension radiating through her muscles, buzzing like static under her skin. She didn't want to break, not here, not in front of them, not ever. But the colonel stepped closer. "Lieutenant, you survived something that was designed to break you. You stitched yourself together without help, but stitches hold only until the wound underneath demands air." Kara's breath faltered. Tangistal lowered her voice even further. "What you refuse to face will own you." A tremor ran through Kara's hands. She didn't hide it fast enough. Behind her, the SEALs continued training, unaware of the storm brewing inches away. Or so she thought. The young SEAL approached carefully, stopping with respectful distance. "Ma'am," he said softly, "Dawson told us to hydrate. Permission to speak not as a trainee but as someone who's been there." Kara closed her eyes. "Not now. Not like this. Not in front of them." But she forced herself to turn toward him. "What is it?" she asked, voice brittle. He hesitated, then spoke with painful sincerity. "You don't have to do this alone." His words landed like a crack across the armor she'd worn for years. Tangistal stepped back, giving her space. Kara stared at the young SEAL, then at Reynolds, then at Dawson, all watching her silently, all waiting, all offering something she'd never accepted. Support. And suddenly her breath broke, not loudly, not visibly, but in a way she couldn't hide from herself. "I walked out of that alley," she whispered, voice trembling, "but I never really left it." The young SEAL's expression softened. "Then let us stand with you until you can." Kara looked down, looked away, looked anywhere but at the truth rising up inside her. For so long she wore silence like armor. But armor rusted, and scars ached. And truth, once spoken, loosened something she'd kept too tight. Tangistal placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You don't lose strength by being human, Lieutenant. You gain it." Kara inhaled slowly, then exhaled the fear she'd been carrying for years. The hall waited. And for the first time ever, she spoke the parts she'd buried. I thought no one would come for me. I thought dying alone in that alley was the punishment for not being enough. And when I survived, I wasn't grateful. I was ashamed." Reynolds looked gutted. Dawson lowered his head. The young SEAL swallowed hard. Tangistal squeezed her shoulder once, firm, steady, reassuring. "You survived because you adapted," the colonel said, "not because you were unworthy." Kara wiped her eyes quickly, once. "I don't want to be broken in front of them." "You're not broken," Tangistal replied. "You're real, and real leaders don't tell their men how to be strong." She paused. "They show them how to stand back up." Kara looked around the hall. The men who once doubted her. The men who now depended on her. The men who saw her as something more than just an instructor. And she stood taller not by force, not by defiance, but by truth finally given breath. She stepped toward the class. Her voice steady, her presence grounded. "We continue." The SEAL straightened instantly, not because of rank. Because of respect. Kara led the next phase with clarity she hadn't felt in years. Every movement precise, every word anchored, every step lighter. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because she wasn't running from them anymore. As the session ended and the SEALs filed out, Reynolds lingered, giving her a subtle nod of gratitude. Dawson clapped her shoulder carefully, as if afraid to put too much pressure. The young SEAL simply said, "Thank you, ma'am." Tangistal stayed behind, arms crossed, watching her with quiet pride. "You did well today," the colonel said. Kara met her gaze. "I almost fell apart." "Almost," Tangistal repeated. "But you didn't, you stood." Kara exhaled, long, steady, freeing. For the first time, the weight felt lighter. Tangistal added softly, "And sometimes, Lieutenant." Kara waited. Strength isn't loud. It's simply surviving the moments no one sees. Kara felt those words settle inside her like truth she'd needed for years. She looked at the empty hall, at the mat still warm beneath her boots, at the sunlight spilling in like a second chance. And she whispered, not to the colonel, not to the SEALs, but to herself, "I'm still here." And that was enough. Because she finally understood something she'd forgotten in the alley. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.